Hey, what's going on, everybody?
Hi.
Hopefully everybody's doing well. It's been a little while since we've done the fish room. But we're back at it. Let us know if you can hear us okay. Wait a minute while people join in here. Everybody have a good holiday? 'Cause it's been, what, 5 or 6 weeks since we've done one?
I know, right?
So, yeah. So hopefully everybody's good. Glad to be back.
Yes.
So,
hey, Jonathan.
hey,
Bill's
Bill.
here.
Hey, Tabby.
So we're gonna do another educational fish corner.
Yes, we are.
Drop some knowledge, and we're talking about water quality, right?
Yep. Yeah, we're going to talk about water quality, kind of what to test for, what to look for, how much the levels of certain things we're testing for should be at, where they should be at, and how to keep the tank clean and everything too. So we'll have some fun with this one too. I'll try not to be too boring with it. So what's going on, Brian?
This is important information.
Yes.
That there's all kinds of stuff out on the internet, and you don't know what to trust, and so we're going to share with you some what we believe is the best way to do things as far as water.
Right. So yeah, I guess we'll go ahead and get into it. Can everybody hear us okay? Just want to make sure before we keep going on. All right.
Sorry, I'm just grabbing a piece of paper in case I need to write something down.
Okay.
Cool.
So we're going to get into kind of what to test for and stuff like that. Eric says, go Stars. It's awesome. So the main things we're going to test here in aquarium and these first few that we're going to go through kind of go both fresh and salt water. It's going to be pH, ammonia, nitrate, and nitrite. Those are your basic tests that you're going to always want to have or availability to or get tested. When cycling the tank, you want to do it at least every week until everything's cycled and ready to go. After that, most people test at least the ammonia, nitrate probably about once a month. And depending on your tank pH, sometimes once a week. Some people will do every day. It just kind of depends. So we'll kind of dive into what each of those readings are and how we get them to where we want them to be and where we want them to be too. So we'll start with pH because that's kind of a big one. And it kind of goes between fresh and salt water. pH is actually the testing the level of hydrogen in the water. And pH is very important in stability for fish and coral. They all need, we want to keep it as stable as possible. Now, the pH does go up and down throughout the day, depending on when the lights are on and off. So we do have some fluctuation. So if you are testing pH, try to test it around the same time you usually would test it every time. And depending on what kind of fish you keep, depends on where you want to do your pH. So freshwater community fish, usually you want to stick between 6.8 and 7.4. African cichlids, you want like 7.8 to 8.6. Tanganyikans, they like it really high. They can go all the way up to 9.2. And then for you saltwater people, whether it's fish only or just reefs, you want it between 7.8 to 8.4. On the saltwater, we like to keep it, but usually here, most of our tanks are about 8.2 to 8.4. And, so we just keep everything pretty solid. I will say dirtier tanks or tanks that don't get water changes or have a lot of decay and stuff like that will actually bring down the pH, which can be hard on a lot of animals. Like I said, the main important thing with all of this stuff is keeping it stable. So there are a few ways to keep it stable. They do make a lot of different buffers for it, as well as doing your water changes. You're going to hear me talk about water changes a lot tonight and how important they are for our fish and our health. So
I just want to stop you right there.
Yeah.
When I learned that the pH could fluctuate depending on the time of day, I thought that was crazy.
Yeah.
So is it like lower in the morning and like higher in the afternoon?
So when the lights are off, the pH tends to be lower. And then as the light turns on, it gets higher and higher. Usually your highest point of pH is usually about 5 to 6 hours after the lights have turned on, for most people. But like I said, if you're going to test pH, if say you do a test once a week, you test at 5 o'clock on Saturday, always try to test around that same time. That way you can see, you can know any fluctuations in pH.
I have a question.
Yep.
I've often wondered if somebody puts their aquarium water in a bag
Yeah.
and then brings it to the store.
Mm-hmm.
What if they let it sit in their car for 2 days and then bring it in the store?
It's going to show up wonky.
That's what I would. That's
So yeah, most of the time when you're testing stuff too, if you are bringing it into a store, it needs to be done pretty fast. I'd say within an hour or two. Any longer than that, pH is going to be, you can read it, but it's not going to be accurate. And temperature can play a big role in it, especially if it gets too hot. It'll mess with your pH too. But when you're bringing stuff in the store, all the other stuff we test for can be done still.
And I don't know if you mentioned salinity. You definitely want to check your salinity.
Salinity is an important one, and I'll get into that one later.
I'm sorry.
So, but yeah. And this kind of goes with pH too. You hear a lot of it, especially in reef tanks, about alkalinity. So alkalinity is a test where it shows the capacity of water to not be acidified. So it actually helps buffer the water up or keep the pH up where it is. So the alkalinity will help keep your pH more stable, depending on where it is. Now, not everything likes high alkalinity. The higher alkalinity, the more stable your pH is, yes. But things like the certain shrimps and certain freshwater fish that like it really soft or low pH, they don't like really hard water or a high alkalinity. So we kind of got to watch out for that too. Most of your reef tanks, which is where most people are going to test for alkalinity, is going to be, you want it between 6 and 14, and that's going to be the German scale or DKH. And actually corals will use alkalinity to help grow too. There are studies that have shown the higher the alkalinity you have in your tank, the faster the corals, your hard corals will grow. But at the same time, you're playing a balancing act, because if you go too high, you can actually burn or kill your coral.
So if you're using reverse osmosis water,
yep.
Do you need to worry about alkalinity? Will it change?
It will change. So a lot of us, anybody that uses or buys water from us, we buffer it for you. So we're buffering for pH and alkalinity too. And some people, like I said, with reef tanks, are the big ones where it fluctuates. Sometimes you will have to add more of an alkalinity buffer to the tank too, as well as just topping off when you need to, because corals will absorb it. As far as like fish only tanks, it's not as important. It's just there to help kind of buffer the pH. So most of the reef tanks here, we keep it between 9 and 10. That seems to be a good level, where it's not burning through all our calcium. We have a little bit to catch up we have a little time to catch up if we, because we only test about once a week. If it gets too low, we can add some and it won't mess with our pH. And we don't have to worry about it burning or hurting corals too. So just something about, kind of goes with pH, so I thought I'd bring it in. And then another thing, so we're going to get down to also the nitrogen cycle, where we talked about ammonia, nitrite, and nitrate. So most of us have had tanks, cycle tanks, everything like that. Basically, you're waiting for bacteria to break things down to become less and less toxic to fish. As fish, whatever food they don't eat, or any poop or anything like that, any feces the fish produce, it is almost immediately turned into ammonia. That is also the most toxic chemical in our tanks right now for fish in the water that will naturally occur. We have bacteria that naturally occurs in tanks, and they start to flourish and grow as ammonia is being produced in the water, that break that down and turn it into nitrite. And then we've got a different bacteria that breaks that down and turns it into nitrate. As it goes down from ammonia to nitrate, it gets less and less toxic to fish. Your goals in all your tanks, if you've got live fish, I don't care if it's freshwater, saltwater, shrimp, or anything like that, for ammonia, you want it at 0. Nitrite, 0. Nitrate, depending on where you're at, it kind of depends on, or what tank you have depends on what you want to do. Most freshwater tanks are fine under 40. I've seen freshwater tanks be all the way up to 160 and do fine.
Right. So if you have nitrites,
right,
you have a problem.
Right. Or ammonia.
Unless you're cycling the
right.
aquarium.
So, and in cycling, we'll actually do another show just on cycling the tank too.
I was going to say,
yeah.
I had a question on that.
But go ahead.
So people come in, and they get, information from a big box store, and they'll have a tank set up and running for like a week with nothing in it.
Mm-hmm.
And I know that you can feed a tank with just food,
Mm-hmm.
and eventually cycle it, but it's going to take a lot longer.
Right.
But yeah, just letting a tank run with nothing in it is not really doing anything, right?
Right. Well, there's a couple different ways to cycle a tank too. Like I said, putting fish in or setting up a tank and just letting it go on its own, where there's nothing producing ammonia, they're not going to be a bacterial growth to help break it down.
Salt water you can cycle with live rock.
Right. So,
but I'm talking like a freshwater tank,
right.
Plastic plants.
Right.
Yeah.
So you can either do things where we do what we call the fish cycle, where we'll do easy starter fish, put them in there. Also recommend things like Turbo Start to also help in there, because that actually is bacteria in a bottle that'll help break down all the waste. So it's like a starter culture for the tank too. Another way to do it, if you don't want to do fish, you can do what's called ghost feeding, where you actually just throw some food in the tank and let the ammonia just spike up, and let it sit. Like I said, freshwater tanks about a month or so, and then you can start adding fish and stuff like that. And actually, through the cycle too, you can add, if you're going to do freshwater, you're going to do plants. You can add plants at any time in the cycle. They don't care about it. They don't need anything, or they're not going to be hurt by ammonia, nitrite, or nitrate.
That's because plants are cool.
Right. And plants are really good for fish. So we'll get into that again on another show too. But yeah, and like she said, nitrite, we also want to keep it 0. And then nitrate, like I said, fish can get used to that. Like I said, most of your freshwater tanks, 40 to 60 is where we usually see them at. Tends to do fine with fish. We actually want 0 as our goal, for the most part. The only exception would be plant tanks and reef tanks. They actually want a little bit. So we're talking anywhere between like 0.25 parts per million and 5. So very, very low nitrates.
I have a comment.
Yeah.
And if anybody else has comments,
please.
Or questions, just chime in. If you're watching live.
Yeah.
If you're watching on YouTube or Facebook after the fact, sorry, you can always message us later. But my question is, oh crap, I forgot.
You forgot. Okay.
I'll think of it.
But yeah, so corals and plants actually will absorb some of the nitrate through photosynthesis. It helps produce colors. A while ago, we used to think we wanted our coral tanks to be at 0 everything, phosphate, nitrate, everything. We're now finding out they want a little bit. Do you remember? Yeah.
Okay. So a lot of people come in and they're like, I have a lot of fish and they're doing great in this like really high nitrate tank. And then they put a new fish in, and then that fish just like dies immediately. It's because the fish that are in the tank have gotten used to the progression of how much nitrates are in there.
Right.
And then you take a fish that's in a different tank that's not used to that, you shock them. So
yeah, and actually, so Manny brought up a good point. There's also another good thing you can use besides Turbo Start. Dr. Tim's ammonia is a really good ammonia starter. Forgot to talk about that after the ghost feeding. You can buy bottles of ammonia. Fritz actually just came out with one too. And actually, Dr. Tim's has a really good bacteria culture too. I forgot the name of it, but it's really good. Another really good one. And the best way to control nitrates too is there's 2 ways. There's 3 ways actually. Watch how much you feed. We all tend to overfeed, no matter who it is, whether it's me or the new person. We all tend to overfeed our fish because they're always going to act hungry and we want them to interact with us, right? So they're always going to come up. So watch how much you feed. Some of the new people, I actually recommend watching. I actually recommend them feeding every other day instead of once a day, just so it'll cut back on how much waste is in the tank. And then water changes again. Like I'm gonna recommend water changes a lot. I think a lot of people's problems is they want to have a beautiful tank, don't want to do the work. You got to do water changes. Very important for all your tanks. I don't care.
Better to do smaller water changes
more frequent,
more often than a big water change once a month. Right.
So not only are you taking the nitrates out that your fish are producing from the food or the leftover food, you're actually replenishing minerals that fish have absorbed, coral have absorbed, or plants too. So you want to make sure, and also you're, putting other foods in there for plants and microorganisms to eat too.
And plus, if you're doing a really big, like a big water change, like once a month, that shocks the aquarium.
Yeah.
Like, you know, you don't want to change the parameters drastically at one time.
Right.
So that's why smaller water changes
Yeah.
are better.
Well, and a big thing, like we talked about pH, we want to keep it as stable as possible. So pH is a big fluxer. Like I said, it'll flux day to day, depending on whether the water's been in light or not, and what buffers are in it and all that kind of stuff. So, you know, like on a 10-gallon tank, you know, it's better to do like a gallon water change once a week than a 4-gallon water change once a month, because everything is just going to be more stable. The tank's going to stay cleaner that way too. And you're not actually drastically changing anything as much, especially right now it's colder out. A lot of us don't heat our water. We're about to put it in the tank when we do water changes. So temperature is a big fluctuation.
I have a good analogy on
Yeah.
that. It's like, it's better to work out like 30 minutes, an hour a day than 5 or 6 hours one day a week.
That's a good one too.
That would hurt. So yeah.
So, and then another thing that we're starting to see real popular when we test for water is going to be phosphate. Usually phosphates are coming from the same thing where we get our nitrates. It's excess food, decaying animals, decaying plant leaves and stuff like that. But it also comes in the food. So a lot of our foods use phosphate as like a preservative almost. So we want to watch out on that. Phosphates won't hurt your fish, but they can cause a lot of algae issues if it gets out of hand. So which is really important in your brightly lit tanks, like your reef tanks and your plant tanks. So on your plant tanks and your reef tanks, you want to keep it about at a 0.5 or 0.05. Sorry. So on your fish only tanks, if you're just lighting it up, it's not a big thing you really need to test for unless you're getting algae issues. But phosphates can definitely cause some problems on your plants and actually get algae growing on the plant leaves and choke them out. Same thing with coral. Hair algae is a big thing in reef tanks because we got really bright lights on the tank. Plants like phosphate and they like nitrate, but we do need a little touch of it in there. So
Like a little sprinkle.
Like a salt bay, just a little bit. So, and then I'm going to go into a couple of trace elements for the saltwater people out there too. So one of the biggest things we test for, besides the basic things that I talked about in saltwater, is going to be calcium, especially in reef tanks. Obviously, calcium is going to be good for your coral growth and skeletons. Most of the ranges we'd like to keep the salt or the calcium in is between 380 and 450. Natural seawater usually sits at about 380 to 425. So yes, the higher the calcium, the faster the corals will grow. But if you get it too high, calcium will do what's called precipitate, or it'll actually dissolve out of solution and won't be able to be absorbed by the corals. So then you're just wasting product. That's kind of the easy way of putting it out there.
But it's not going to hurt anything.
It can actually choke corals out when you get too high. So usually once you get over like 500 or 525, you'll start seeing white deposits like on your glass, not little spots, but actually like white film on the glass. And that's the calcium actually being falling out of solution in the water. And corals can absorb it, and it can actually choke them out when it gets too high. So after that's going to be magnesium. We test magnesium here about once a month. Most of the time when you do your water changes right, you don't need to actually dose magnesium. We usually keep magnesium anywhere between 12 and 1450. So the actual rate coral absorbs things is going to be 1 part calcium to 3 parts magnesium. So good rule of thumb is whatever your calcium is, if you want it to be at a good ratio with your magnesium, you'll take what your calcium level is, multiply by 3. That's where your mag should be. Magnesium also helps kind of keep alkalinity in doing everything properly too. So especially with people that are running really high alkalinity, keep your magnesium a little higher too. That'll help it where in case you do accidentally get too high, it won't burn corals as much. It also is shown magnesium, high levels of magnesium can choke out some weird algae you get in reef tanks too. Like Bryopsis, which is really hard to kill. People have brought their mag up to 15 or 1600 without any effects on the coral and has killed and choked out Bryopsis. And then another big one would be iodine. So all corals are going to use iodine. Your inverts are going to use iodine. And actually, technically, it's iodide. Iodine's toxic. So most of us, when we do our water changes, are going to actually put that back in. It's not something you need to test very often. I test them here about once every 3 or 4 months. So those are just a few things that I thought I'd go over on what we kind of test and what to look for. And also I'd go over about how often we test. So like I said, in a cycling tank, usually people come in once a week. And I recommend people to do it once a week. There's many ways to test them. There's the the droppers like we have from API. These are a pretty easy way to go. Downside of these is there's always a chance for user error. But pretty easy to read. Not always the most accurate, but gives you a good idea. And then if really good for using when you're cycling a tank. Also, just to have on hand, Mike likes these a lot because they're really quick. These are just little dip strips. So these will do pH, KH, nitrate, and nitrite too. And these are really fast. You just dip in your water, and then you match it with the color kit on the side. So those are great for when you're cycling a tank. You just want to test out the basics. Usually after a tank's more stabilized, you kind of get to know where everything is. Then we kind of gravitate from testing those things from once a week to usually once a month. And then on your reef tanks, most of us will test things like alkalinity, mag, and calcium about once a week. pH, not so much because right now that tends to be the trend. And then we'll dose accordingly. So sometimes you will have to dose, like these tanks here, we pretty much dose calcium 3 times a week and alkalinity twice a week.
I was going to say, couldn't dosing be a whole other episode?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I'll get really deep into this. So, but I don't want to bore you all too much on this one.
But dosing can be very, on salt or fresh.
Yeah.
If you got plants, can be a very confusing and
Yeah.
overwhelming thing for people. So I think that's
Yeah.
something that we should touch on at some point.
Well, and that's a good thing to point out too with this is, like I said, the main thing is keeping it consistent. That's why once a week on some of your trace elements or things that a lot of people will dose for can kind of tell us how often to dose, and how our tanks are growing and stuff like that. Even plant tanks need to be tested. Some plant tanks you need to dose phosphate and you need to dose nitrate as well as doing your water changes and maybe even overfeeding your fish, just so the plants have stuff to grow.
Iron.
And iron's a big one. I forgot to put iron on there. But iron's another really good trace element to test for in plant tanks. Potassium is also a really good one. And we are seeing people test for potassium in saltwater tanks now too. And then for those of you that are doing CO2 in your plant tanks, drop checkers, which I don't have one right now, are really cool ways to check your pH to make sure you are not overgassing your tank or putting too much CO2 in your tank, but also making sure you're putting enough in there at the same time. So, and then, going back to there's another way to test a lot of this stuff too. Most of the people do this for saltwater, but not freshwater. ICP testing. So ICP is actually, they'll send you vials, you put it in the mail, you mail it off, and they email you an actual broken down chart of everything in the water. And you're seeing this with a lot of reefers, and they'll actually match your tank to whatever ocean you want it to be, and tell you what's going on. They're testing things as I think to like the 0.000, I think. So, but that's a lot of science right there too. But it's pretty cool to kind of see it break down.
That's if you're hardcore,
Yeah.
man.
Well, I know some reefers, like with 150s, I'll see people send them out like twice a year.
Yeah.
Just to get an idea. So, and some of the, best way to keep things consistent is to start off with the cleanest water possible. So, doing RODI water or RO water, and then adding buffers that are made for fish or your reef tank or whatever is kind of the best way to do it, because there's not going to be any ammonia, there's not going to be any nitrite or nitrate, no chlorine, no chloramine, no copper, whatever else is in the line. RODI is going to take all of that crud out. So we're going to start with pure water, and then actually do reconstitute it for whatever we want it to do, whether it's for shrimp, whether it's for just a normal freshwater tank or a salt tank with salt water. As you know, most of us here are Tropic Marin fans. We use Tropic Marin buffers and salts and everything like that. Made in Germany. It's one of the only pharmaceutical grade salts. I
even recommend RO water for betas.
Yeah.
Because if you use tap water, you'll get that like white crusty edge around the top of it. And if you use the reverse osmosis, you don't get that.
Yeah. So, and I've tested our tap water here. It's got ammonia in it. And that's shown up on an API test kit. And their ammonia starts at 0.25. So there's a good amount of ammonia in the water. And Prime only goes so far. All Prime does is it binds up the ammonia, nitrate, and nitrite in the water, weighs it down into the gravel. After about 36 hours, if it's not been broken down by your bacteria, it's released back into the water. So sometimes during a water change, you're not really helping it by doing it with tap water, especially here in the cities, Dallas, Fort Worth, and surrounding cities. You're actually just adding more nitrates into the water at the end of the day.
I don't drink tap water.
Yeah.
I don't make my fish drink it.
No. So, but yeah, and I've got a breakdown on some of the stuff they found in our tap water, as well as we can show you some tests. So we like recommending tap water, like you said, even for betas. I mean, they tend to do a lot better with RODI water and with buffers that are made for betas.
Yeah, they'll live longer.
Yeah. And they're prettier. And you're not going to have your phosphate issues like you will, because phosphates are also in your tap water. So, and another reason we like the Tropic Marin for you salt people, it's one of the most consistent salts we've ever found. And Mike's been in the industry for how long? Ever?
He's old.
Yeah. He actually, again, we're going to get into this. It's partly his fault. I'm in the hobby. But I mean, he's tried so many salts. I've tried a few salts the long time I've been here too. And we've always gone back to Tropic Marin because it's the most consistent. The alkalinity is on point every time. The pH is on point every time. It's always right there. Some of the other salts, they fluctuate up and down.
Yeah, he's obsessed with
Tropic Marin.
With how the salt works. So Tropic Marin is what he's found to be the best. And he's been in the industry since he was like 15.
Yeah. And there's when we mix it, I don't know if you've ever seen mixing buckets for other stores, and I'm not downing other stores. Some stores use good salt, some don't. We used to sell an okay salt. But if you look at the mixing bucket, it was brown after like 2 weeks of mixing salt in it. Totally. There's so much sediment and crud in there. And they use an anti-caking agent to make sure the salt doesn't clump together because of the moisture everywhere. With Tropic Marin, our buckets are clean 6 months later. They're still clean.
I didn't even realize
that. You've noticed we haven't had to clean it.
I worked at another store, to be unnamed, and they use like a more budget-friendly salt.
Mm-hmm.
And they'd get a new bucket, and immediately it'd be brown all on the inside.
So a lot of that, and I've seen people actually put like filter material in there, leave it in, take it out, and it started out white and it just turned brown. And like I said, those are weird things in the water. And some things, like we talk about precipitation of calcium and all that, the lower quality salts sometimes add too much or not enough. And every batch is different. So, and then I'm really stingy here about our RO water machine. I'm back there checking it at least once a week, changing filters as needed. Our water going into it before it hits any of our filters, our TDS or total dissolved solid, is over 250 parts per million of different types of things we don't know of. I could send it off for an ICP test and get it back. We might actually want to do that one day.
Oh, okay.
They're not too expensive, but yeah, and it'll actually there's some nasty things in there. And then as soon as it goes through our RO and DI machines, it comes out at 0. So it is pure water. And we actually have to rebuffer it or add salt to it, make sure it's safe for fish, and do it. So your shrimp people, especially shrimp people that want to do the cardenas, they need that kind of water. So the best thing I suggest to keep your water clean, start with clean water. So, and then testing and water changes. I think I said water changes enough. But yeah, that's all I kind of got for you today.
If you wanted to, if you didn't want to lug, 5-gallon jugs back and forth. I mean, obviously we sell the reverse osmosis water, but you can purchase a reverse osmosis system for your home.
Yep.
You're just going to have to use all the right buffers.
Yep. And we can help you out here. We've got all the different types of buffers. Most of the water we sell, we buffer for you at no charge.
Right.
So, you don't have to worry about that. But yeah, like she said, there are home units, that they're not too expensive.
They're just not going to pump out as much water.
Right.
How much does our unit make a day?
Our unit will make 700 gallons in 24 hours.
Nice.
And we have 2 of them.
Nice.
So yeah, so we can make some water pretty fast.
We got the water, you
we
guys.
do. But yeah, thanks for joining me. I got a couple of things more to talk about. I know there's a couple of y'all still left. We will get into more in-depth stuff on this, and I'll try to split it between fresh and salt. We will do some on just salt, some on fresh. It kind of depends. But we have a fish sale next weekend.
Oh, it's Miles's birthday sale.
So Miles's birthday sale. So I will get stocked up on freshwater. We'll get new plants. We'll get fish. Not like we did get new fish in this week too for fresh. So we'll get stocked up for that. It's going to be buy 3 get 1 free on all freshwater livestock. So fish, inverts, and plants. So that'll be fun.
On plants, but that's cool.
Yeah.
Yeah. So,
may as well.
Yeah. Get your tank stocked.
So.
And if y'all haven't met Miles, he looks just like Chase.
Yeah, they call him Mini Chase. He's got he's got curlier hair, but he will wear a hat sometimes. But yeah, call him Little Chase too. Sometimes he likes that. Not really. So for anything news related, Sherry will text out stuff. So you can text OP Big D to 22828 for a newsletter. How often do you send it out? Once a month?
Yeah, once or twice.
Yeah.
Got something cool going on.
So if anything, there's a sale going on, whether it's fish or dog or cat stuff or anything like that, or any big events, we've got that going on. I'm gonna start doing this again every other Friday, and the weeks I don't do it, Sherry's got her show on Wednesdays, 7:30. She does her dog and cat stuff and showcases some new products and farm products we got here too. If any of y'all want to hear me talk about a certain topic or see anything different in the show, feel free to message us either here on Facebook. You can email us at info@odysseypets.com or chase@odysseypets.com. And yeah, we hopefully see y'all soon.
Thank you for watching,
Thank
guys.
you. Bye.
Good night.